Listo.
Okay, so Indonesia is the fourth largest populated country and the third higher emitter of greenhouse gases. And the mainly cause of this is deforestation, forest fires, and degradation of the peatland. The estimated amount of emissions yearly are around 500 tons of CO2 per capita, and also are very influenced by the impacts of climate change over the country that has worsened out the further human-caused global decisions, such as non-effective public policies and lack of social conscience. The increase of greenhouse gases emissions will continue to be affected naturally by the climate variability of the geographic thing of the country, and also is going to lead to more intense weathers that will cause several sanitary needs and higher probability of sickness due to poor environmental health. An example of this will be the increase of mosquito epidemics due to non-treated sewage and also non-appropriate treatment of drinkable water for this mainly purpose. It is also the geographic limitation of the country since it is the largest archipelago in the world, formed by 17,000 islands. But also what is the expected by the government and the community to be done. Most of the targets are usually proposed by international organisms of control with higher expectancies. And also the Indonesian government has a huge opportunity over here to boost the economy and shrink the deficit by creating jobs and committing to the average GDP growth by reaching out to 6% until 2045. Also reducing the greenhouse gases emissions by 43% by 2030. That is a really non-achievable goal by now. Also, the accelerated climate action is fundamental to a strong recovery and will help Indonesia's first year of achievement to be strong and grow, to foster poverty reductions and save life by reduction of air pollution and water pollution.
Okay, so now we're gonna talk about climate change risks, but first, the vulnerability of the country is mainly based on the geographic formation of the country, as is based in just islands. So the consequences could be even harder for them of the climate change. This is seen basically by saying that approximately 42 million people live under 20 meters above sea level. So an increasement of 1 meter in sea level could represent sinking of very important islands, like including the capital of the country that is named Jakarta, that in the consequences of the climate change, the economic consequences, we could name that because Jakarta has one of the most important ports in the world, and that could represent like a really important loss of money. Also, the productivity of the country could be affected by the reallocations of people by the sinkings and the exposure to more sickness, and because of the sinkings and other sickness. And on the other hand, the frequency of natural disasters will affect biodiversity in the country, as there would be more wildfires, for example.
Okay, so regarding climate policies, there are some policies targeted to abating emissions, whereas some others are aimed at adaptation efforts. Even though Indonesia is working in an emission trading system, there is no date for implementation of it. They're still experimenting with different policies. Moreover, among the emission reduction policies, there are the targets plated in the Paris Agreement and some national plans for developing adaptation policies. Um, and finally, considering that the main sources of emissions are land use and energy production, a set of regulations is in process of adoption. Sorry. On the first hand, for tackling emissions due to energy production, they established different long-run targets for the energy supply mix. For instance, renewables should account for the 23% by 2025 and 31% by 2050. On the other hand, land use and deforestation, the Indonesian government is developing forest management units in order to license land use. With these licenses, they try to enforce sustainable management practices, yet the management units require further strengthening such that the law is correctly enforced. And finally, what are the challenges Indonesia faces? Firstly, the energy supply is highly carbon intensive. In fact, Indonesia is one of the few countries in the world that keeps investing on coal-fired electricity. And therefore, even though there are some targets on the energy supply mix, it is quite likely that these targets will never be met. Secondly, due to the pandemic recovery, a bunch of policies was deployed in order to boost economic activity. For instance, a reduction of price limits on carbon. The issue is that this kind of policies generate wrong incentives in the economy since it makes carbon-intensive energy cheaper than renewables. In fact, this should be understood as there were competition between unsubsidized renewables against subsidized coal. And finally, a lack of institutional strength has a great impact on the adoption of policies that targets climate change. For instance, the palm oil industry and the state electricity company are two influential groups that have affected climate policy before. The former has received more and more land for production, competing with sustainable projects, and the latter has influenced the energy transition in order to keep consuming coal-fired electricity and slow down the adoption of renewables.